It's setting our whole life aside, setting our selfish ambition, our pride, our wants, our desires to the side and saying, no, God, I consecrate myself to you. All of it is yours, and do with it what you please. Well, good morning. I'm going to continue in the spirit of this morning by saying Happy Mother's Day to all the moms, all of the grandmoms, all of the aunts, and all the women in our lives. Let's give it up for the moms this morning. We hope that this day is an incredible blessing to you. We hope that you are showered with all the love and the honor that you so deserve. You know, I love Mother's Day because, obviously it's filled with flowers, times where we get to have brunch with our family and with our friends. It's filled with last-second stops at gas stations to pick up cards on the way home from church. No judgment here. No judgment here. God's grace covers your procrastination. I was thinking about writing a heartfelt Mother's Day message a couple of weeks ago, but in true mom fashion, I decided to wait until the night before so that I could feel all that my mom felt when she was doing all of my school projects years ago. No, just kidding. I've been working on this for a couple of weeks. I'm really excited to give it to you guys today, and I think God has something for each of us this morning. But I do love Mother's Day because it's this kind of collective moment for us as a culture where we pause and we celebrate the women in our lives, those godly women, those godly voices who have spoken into our lives and shaped us into the people that we've become. I don't know about you, but when I think about Mother's Day, there's kind of one word that rises to the surface on Mother's Day, and it's the word legacy. Everyone say legacy. And when we think about legacy, the question isn't if we're going to leave a legacy. The question is, what kind of legacy will we leave? And I know in a room like this that there are a lot of women who have given thought to that. They've thought about the kind of legacy that they're going to pass on to the next generation. And so because of that, they live very intentionally with great intentionality so that they hand off a legacy that is Christ-centered and God-honoring. But we also know in our world and in our culture that there are people who are just completely indifferent to this idea of legacy. So they just kind of coast through life, paying no attention to their legacy, and what they do is they leave behind broken legacies. They leave behind confused legacies. They leave behind those kind of legacies that make your grandkids raise their eyebrows across the table at Thanksgiving because it's just weird. People can just be really, really weird. They leave behind those kind of legacies. So there are people who are very indifferent when it comes to this idea of legacy. And here's the thing. We all leave one. We all leave a legacy. And this week, I read this really short but profound statement by an author. He said, you don't get to write your obituary, but you do get to live it. You don't get to write your obituary, but you do get to live it. I was also reading an article by a journalist who had the opportunity over the course of a few years to canvass and survey hundreds of hospice nurses and ER doctors and ER nurses. And what he wanted to find out, he said, what were the things you heard from people in their final moments here on earth? As they were about to pass from this life to the next, what were some of the things that they shared? And in all these conversations, he said there were four themes that emerged in all of those conversations. There were kind of four common threads that were woven through those conversations with those doctors and nurses. And the first was this. These people had regrets of lost or broken relationships. As these doctors and nurses sat with people, they shared in their final moments the hurt and the regret they had for relationships that were lost. Maybe it was a relationship with a spouse. Maybe it was a relationship with a child or with a grandchild. Or maybe it was a relationship with someone who they considered a close friend at one point, but they had lost contact or something had happened in the relationship and it was over. The second thing was really interesting. They said in all of these conversations, not once did a person ever say that they regretted not working more. They never said, man, I wish I had just given more time, more energy, more of my hours to my occupation. Instead, they said they regretted the time that they wasted in that at the expense of their family and in their relationships. The third thing that was really interesting to me was they said that there was this regret of not having children and then not having grandchildren. It said that these people made a decision, a conscious decision at one point in their life, that their career, that their status, that maybe their wealth was the thing that they were aiming their entire life or orienting their entire life around. And so they saw children as a distraction to that. So now they're in a bed in their final moments on this earth, and they're all alone. And they regretted the fact that they had made a decision not to have children. And the fourth thing, the final thing that emerged in these conversations was how much wasted time and wasted energy they gave to negative emotions and negative feelings. They talked about seasons in their life where they had given so much of their mental energy, so much of their spiritual energy to negative feelings, negative emotions, instead of focusing on the positive things or the good things that God had given them in their life that were for His glory and for their good. And in summary, this journalist said that death has this unique way, this kind of profound way to bring clarity about what truly matters, and clarity about the kind of legacy that we want to leave. But for these people, it was too late for them. Their story was coming to an end, so they couldn't change their legacy. But we don't want to wait until death to determine what kind of legacy we want, right? So in His kindness, God gives us clarity around this idea of legacy in the story of King David. So we're going to be back in the Old Testament today in 1 Chronicles chapter 28 and 29, and we're going to be meeting up with King David in his final moments here on earth. His final moments as king over the nation of Israel. His final moments with his son Solomon, who would one day replace him as king. And what we're going to see in David's story today is he's at the end of his life, and he gives us a masterclass about what leaving a legacy should look like. A legacy that glorifies God and then also blesses future generations. And what we're going to see in David's story, and what I hope you walk away from here this morning knowing is that the key to leaving a legacy is to live a legacy. To live a legacy not later, but right now. But first, we need to understand when we talk about legacy, what are we talking about? What does this word legacy mean? And in its most basic form, most basic definition, a legacy is the lasting impact we have on others' lives. The legacy that we leave behind is the ripple effect of our life that impacts the lives of those who are around us. Now, in the setting of a church, as Christ followers, we understand that legacy is just about discipleship. When we talk about legacy, we're talking about discipleship. We're talking about passing on faith, passing on wisdom, passing on purpose to the emerging generations by living intentionally. And we're going to see that the best way to leave a legacy is to live a legacy. And David shows us how. Now, if you've ever heard me preach before, you know that I typically really try to avoid alliteration, and I definitely really avoid and cringe at the idea of using an acrostic. But I don't know if you're like me, but growing up, my grandmother, she had acrostics hung all over her house. Acrostics that she had crocheted or she had done with needlepoint all over her house. So in honor of my grandmother, my nanny, we're going to do an acrostic this morning to help you guys understand this message today. So let's walk through this acrostic together. Legacy. And for the guys in the room, that spells legacy. We're going to be in 1 Chronicles chapter 28, verse 2. King David, in his final moments, stands before the nation of Israel, and it says this. Then King David rose to his feet and said, "Hear me, my brothers and my people. I had it in my heart to build a house of rest for the ark of the covenant of the Lord and for the footstool of our God, and I made preparations." Everyone say preparations. "For building, but God said to me, you may not build a house for my name, for you're a man of war and have shed blood." The L in legacy stands for live for the days you won't see. Live for the days you won't see. David wanted to build a temple for God, but God said no because David was a warrior. David had been to battle. David had shed blood on the battlefield, so God said that he was unfit to build his holy house, that he was unfit to build the temple. But what's so interesting we see here in David's response is David doesn't pout. David makes preparations. It says that he stockpiled these precious stones. He drew blueprints for the temple, and he charged the next generation with the task of building the temple. David lived for a future he would never walk into. David lived for a day that he would never see. In 1938, my grandfather, Gerald Powell, stood in a courtroom in a courthouse in North Texas. And his father had made a decision that year that was very uncommon for that time, a decision that was very shameful for that culture and that place. He had made a decision to divorce his wife and to leave his children. And in 1938, in the teeth of the Great Depression, men had the option not to provide child care for any kids over the age of 14. Now, they could take that option if they wanted to and to provide for their family, or they could walk away from it. And at 14 years old, my grandfather, Gerald Powell, stood and listened as his father said that he would not be providing child support for his son and for my grandfather's siblings over the age of 14. And he told me that he went up to his dad at that point because he recognized what that meant for him. He knew that his mom didn't have the ability, the time, or the capacity to work, to provide for the entire family. So he knew at 14 this meant that he was going to have to go to school and get a full-time job to provide for him and to provide for his family. So he walked up to his dad. The final thing he ever said to his father, and he said, "Dad, what about me? What am I supposed to do?" And what you need to know is that my great-grandfather had another family on the side, and he looked at my grandfather and he said, "I've got a new family. You're not my problem anymore." And now that moment changed the trajectory of my grandfather's life. Because he could have walked away from that moment a hardened and bitter man who was looking to get his vengeance on someone or something for the rest of his life. But instead, he walked away from that moment a changed man. And he said to me, "John, I was never going to allow my kids or my grandkids or my great-grandkids to ever feel like I felt at 14 years old hearing those words from my father." So he had a very successful career as a chemical engineer for Dow Chemical Company. He raised an amazing family, amazing kids. He loved his wife, my grandmother, very faithfully because he knew what it meant to live for the days he would never see. And even more than that, he recognized that his education in chemical engineering at the University of Texas was a very profound time for him that shaped his life and changed his future. So when he passed away last year, he set up a scholarship fund that would pay the tuition for a student every year in perpetuity in his name because he wanted to impact the life of someone else, and he wanted someone who he would never see, someone who would never know, he would never know their name, to know that someone else loved them, cared for them, and wanted them to have purpose and meaning in their life, because my grandfather lived for days that he would never see. The legacy we're living today needs to be a legacy that echoes into eternity. What we need to understand is we don't need to live today and just build for today. Legacy is not building our kingdom today. Legacy is all about sowing for someday. Because the seeds that you plant now, someone else will harvest in the future. And that's the point. Live for days that you'll never see. The next point we see comes from 1 Chronicles 28, verse 9 and 10. It says, "And you, Solomon, my son, know the God of your father and serve him with a whole heart and with a willing mind. For the Lord searches all hearts and understands every plan and thought. If you seek him, he will be found by you. But if you forsake him, he will cast you off forever. Be careful now, for the Lord has chosen you to build a house for the sanctuary. Be strong and do it." The E in legacy stands for equip the next generation. Equip the next generation. David didn't just give Solomon gold, all of the wealth that he accumulated in his time as king of Israel. He gave him a vision for pursuing God. He said, "Solomon, know the God of your father, serve him with a whole heart and with a willing mind." David could have just passed down treasure to his son Solomon. Instead, he passed down truth. Truth of the one true creator God and the purpose that God had for his life. He gave Solomon something that gold couldn't buy. He gave Solomon a vision that was anchored in eternity. So for us, equipping the next generation, it means handing them more than just tools. It means handing them more than just resources. It means handing them truth. Equip the next generation. And as we think about this idea, there are two questions, reflection questions, I want you to think about this morning. These questions kind of cut to the core, and they do an x-ray of our heart to see where we stand when it comes to how we're investing in the next generation. The first question is this: who are you pouring into right now? Who are you pouring into right now? Who are you investing your life in? Who are you discipling right now? Who are you passing on faith and wisdom and purpose to right now? And if you don't have the answer to that question, let the Spirit convict your heart. And then ask the Spirit to give you a name of someone that you have influence over, that you can begin today investing your life in, pouring yourself in, equipping the next generation. The second question we need to ask ourselves is, who will carry your baton of faith? We see here in David's story that his time on earth is ending. His time as king is ending. So he is passing his baton of faith to his son Solomon. He's telling him to know the Lord, to seek the Lord, and to serve the Lord. Who are you handing your baton of faith to when your time on earth comes to an end? The key thing we need to understand is, don't just leave a legacy. Don't just leave a legacy. Live one into someone else. Live your legacy into someone else. Equip the next generation. The next point comes from 1 Chronicles 29, verse 2 and 3. David's going on in this public prayer here before the nation of Israel. He says, "So I have provided for the house of my God so far as I was able, the gold for the things of gold, the silver for the things of silver, and the bronze for the things of bronze, the iron for the things of iron, and wood for the things of wood, besides great quantities of onyx and stones for setting, antimony," whatever that is, "colored stones, all sort of precious stones, and marble. Moreover, in addition to all that I have provided for the holy house, I have treasure of my own gold." Let me start that over again. "I have treasure of my own gold and silver, and because of my devotion to the house of my God, I give it to the house of my God." Then the people rejoiced because they had given willingly, for with a whole heart they had offered freely to the Lord. David the king also rejoiced greatly. "But who am I and what is my people that we should be able thus to offer willingly? For all things come from you, and of your own have we given you." The G in legacy stands for give generously. Give generously. David here doesn't just lead the building of the temple. It says that he funds it from his own account. That he funds the building of the temple from his own account. He could have just handed off treasure to his son to build the temple, but he wanted the nation to know in this moment that not only was he behind this in a political sense, but he was behind this in a personal sense. And we see here that his generosity wasn't out of obligation. His generosity here was an overflow of his heart. The overflow of a heart that was bowed before the Creator God in worship, so that the people of Israel would have a house of worship for their God. Because giving isn't about wealth. It's about worship. Generosity, when we're generous with God, with our time, our talents, and our treasures, it just reflects the heart of a God who gave us everything in his Son, Jesus Christ. And you may be sitting here today saying, "Well, John, I don't have much money. I barely can make ends meet month to month. I barely have 2 nickels that I can rub together." What you need to understand here is when we talk about generosity, we're not just talking about money. We're talking about your time. We're talking about your talents. We're talking about what I spoke about in equipping the next generation. It's investing your life into someone else. And when you find that someone, you need to give of yourself generously to them, to reflect the heart of God into their life. Because generosity is not about having deep pockets. Generosity is about having a deep yes to God. It's not about deep pockets, it's about a deep yes to God. That whatever God asks you to do, whatever mission God calls you on, that you respond with a yes, because you know he's going to lead you where you need to go, he's going to protect you, and he's going to provide for you on that path. A question I want you to ask yourself as we think about generosity is, are you investing in things that will still matter when you're gone? Are you investing today in things that will still matter when you're gone? Or are you just hoarding up treasure here on earth? Your car, your bank account, your social status, the vacations that you go on, those aren't bad things in and of themselves, but what we need to understand is, are you investing in things that will still go on whenever you're gone? Because the things you hold on to, the things that you truly value in life, they'll die with you. But if you give to God, what you give lives forever. So give generously. The next letter to our acrostic we find in 1 Chronicles 29, verse 10. It says, "Therefore David blessed the Lord in the presence of the assembly. And David said, 'Blessed are you, O Lord, the God of Israel, our Father, forever and ever. Yours, O Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the victory and the majesty. For all that is in the heavens and in the earth is yours. Yours is the kingdom, O Lord, and you are exalted as head above all. Both riches and honor come from you, and you rule over all. In your hand are power and might, and in your hand it is to make great and to give strength to all. And now we thank you, our God, and praise your glorious name.'" A stands for acknowledge God as the source. Acknowledge God as the source. In David's final public prayer here, he declares that everything comes from God. Here, David models worship and also humility. We have to recognize that this guy is unbelievably wealthy. He is the king of one of the most powerful empires in the world at that time. He could have boasted. He could have kind of basked in the glow of his accomplishment, but he instead said that no, God is the source of everything. Every good and every perfect thing that has come into my life, every blessing that I have received comes from God. Have you ever been outside at night when there's a bright full moon and the sky is just like completely crystal clear and you just stood there in awe? Where the moon is so bright that it clears the path in front of you, it pushes away the darkness, it's so bright that it even casts shadows. Have you ever experienced something like that? Now we know that the moon doesn't have any light of its own. The moon just reflects the light of the sun. And what we see here in David's final public prayer is he doesn't stand in the glow of his accomplishments. He knew that he was a moon. He knew that he was not a sun, that instead he was just reflecting the light and the glory of the one true source of God. David knew that he was a moon. He knew that he wasn't the sun. And so he acknowledged that God was the source. A question for us to consider on this point is, are people seeing the source? Are people seeing God? Are people seeing Jesus when they look at you? When people look at your life and examine the way that you live, examine the choices that you make, examine where you invest your time and your money, do they see the source? Do they see Jesus? Or do they just stop at the reflection? Because a surrendered life doesn't say, "Look at me." A surrendered life to God says, "Look at him." And that's what our life is meant to do. Acknowledge God is the source. Chapter 29, verse 19 says, "Grant to Solomon, my son, a whole heart, that he may keep your commandments, your testimonies, and your statutes, performing all, and that he may build the palace for which I have made provision." C stands for commit and consecrate. Commit and consecrate. Earlier in the text, David told his son Solomon to be strong and courageous and to do the work. He reminds Solomon that God's not going to leave him, that God's not going to forsake him until the work is completed. He's telling Solomon, be committed. Be all in. He's telling Solomon to consecrate himself. This word consecrate just simply means to dedicate something completely for God's purposes. To set aside something completely for God's purposes. And what we need to understand is when we're talking about consecrate in the context of Scripture, it doesn't mean, hey, God, I'm going to give you a couple of hours each day and I'm going to give you a few hours on Sunday morning. When we talk about consecrating ourselves before God, it's setting our whole life aside, setting our selfish ambition, our pride, our wants, our desires to the side and saying, no, God, I consecrate myself to you. All of it is yours, and do with it what you please. We do that understanding that God is for his glory and for our good, and that he will lead us down straight paths and that he will provide for us, and he will meet us at the point of our need, but we have to consecrate ourselves, give our whole life to God in the process. The application here for us is to understand that a godly legacy is just simply built by staying faithful to your calling. Whatever that specific calling that God has put on your life, a godly legacy is built by staying faithful to that. So give God your whole life. Let your obedience today shape someone else's tomorrow. Commit and consecrate. And then finally, 1 Chronicles 29, verse 22 says this, "And they made Solomon, the son of David, king the second time, and they anointed him as prince for the Lord and Zadok as priest. Then Solomon sat on the throne of the Lord as king in place of David his father, and he prospered, and all of Israel obeyed him. All the leaders and the mighty men and also the sons of King David pledged their allegiance to King Solomon, and the Lord made Solomon very great in the sight of all Israel, and bestowed on him such royal majesty as had not been on any king before him in Israel, including his father." The Y stands for yield the spotlight. Yield the spotlight. David here steps aside as king. Solomon is now appointed as the king over Israel. And what we see is so interesting in David's response here. There's no bitterness in David. There's no jealousy in David. There's just blessing. He blesses his son Solomon, and he blesses his former nation, Israel. Because great legacies are marked by humility. And David here understood that it was never about him. It was never about his legacy. It was never about his name, his wealth, his fame, but that it was always about God. So 6 years after 1938, my grandfather entered World War II. In the summer of 1944, he landed on the beaches of Normandy and fought his way through the Eastern European front of the war. He was a part of a group that helped to liberate the Nordhausen concentration camp. He returned in the fall of 1945 from his war experience, and for 60 years, he never spoke once of what he experienced in Europe in 1944 and in 1945. You see, my grandfather, he had 7 granddaughters, but he only had 1 grandson. So by default, I was his favorite grandchild. And I knew that I could reach him, and he and I had a very unique connection. So about 20 years ago, I went to my grandfather and I said, "Granddaddy, we want to know your story. I want to be able to tell my kids and for them to tell their kids about their great-grandfather." And so for the first time in 60 years, he opened up and told us about his experiences in the war. In the summer of 2014, my aunt flew my grandmother and my grandfather back to Europe, and he started his journey back where his war experience began on the beaches of Normandy. And he made his way through Europe and followed the path that he had followed in the war. But what he wasn't aware of is that his story began to spread and be shared with the people in that part of the world. And so every village, every town that he entered, there were parades that were held in his honor. There were ceremonies held at courthouses and in city centers to honor his service and the sacrifice that he made and the men that he served with made so that these people could be liberated from the Nazi Empire. And he was completely just humbled. He couldn't believe that these people would care this much about him. 4 years ago, the story of my grandfather's war experience made its way to the top of the government in the nation of France. And they issued him the highest honor that the nation of France issues anyone. It's the French Legion of Honor. And so in 2021, they flew a French ambassador to my grandfather's house in Central Texas, and they held a ceremony there. And the news was there, the media was there to capture this event. The French ambassador presented my grandfather with the French Legion of Honor, and they asked him to share about his experience and to share whatever was on his heart. And what was so interesting in that moment is the first thing that my grandfather did was speak about the men that he served with. In that whole speech, he never once talked about himself. He just talked about serving with these men who were heroes and who should be standing alongside him in that moment. Last February, I had the opportunity to be with my grandfather. In his final moments, he and I had this really unique, special connection. He was 99 years old. He was 2 months shy of his 100th birthday, and I got to kneel next to his bed. And before coming to see him that day, I had the opportunity to tell my pastor about my grandfather and the honors he received in his war experience. My grandfather hadn't said much for days. We knew that his time was very short, and I kneeled next to his bed, and I held his hand and I said, "Granddaddy, before I came here today, I got to tell my pastor about you." He didn't open his eyes, but he said, "Oh, you shouldn't have done that, John." He said it because he knew what it was like and the value in yielding the spotlight. He never wanted the attention to be on him. So I held his hand. I told stories. He just laid there. I read Psalm 23 over him, and then I prayed. And when I said amen to that prayer, the final thing my grandfather said on this earth was a response to my prayer, and it was his response to God. He said, "Save the world." The final thing that came out of my grandfather's mouth was a 99-year-old heart pleading to God to save the world. Because this wounded 14-year-old boy who stood in a courthouse many, many years before and heard his father basically say that he didn't care about him and didn't love him, his heart was still so soft because he wanted people to experience the love, the acceptance, and the freedom that can only come through Jesus Christ. In his entire life, he modeled that by yielding the spotlight with everyone he came in contact with. And here's the thing I learned from my granddad. You may never know the legacy that you're going to leave. But if, like my grandfather, if like King David, you yield the spotlight to God, his glory will shine through your life. So in conclusion this morning, a legacy for us as we talk about this word isn't something that we leave when we die. It's something we build as we live. We need to understand that. We build it each and every day through each and every choice and decision we make. Is this about me or is this about God? But as Christ followers in the church, there's one legacy we know that changed everything. On the cross, when Jesus has been nailed to the cross, his hands pierced, his feet pierced, wearing the crown of thorns, he lifted his head to heaven and said, "Father, it is finished." And he wasn't saying, "My life is coming to an end." He's saying, "Father, the mission you've sent me here to accomplish, it is finished." He was saying sin was defeated, that Satan was silenced, that death was crushed, that Jesus had completed the mission that his Father sent him to earth to accomplish, so that all who place their faith in him could be saved and could be set free. And for us, as followers of Jesus, that's the ultimate legacy. And for those who follow him, we know that our legacy begins in his. So the question that we ask ourselves isn't, what will I be remembered for? The question we need to ask ourselves is, what will I do today? What can I do today that will point others to him? Because we need to start today. Because legacy isn't later, legacy is now. Let's pray.